presented by Walker Ladd on being a funny woman in academia, the lived experience. I will keep time for you. You can go ahead and share your slides when you're ready.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Taylor, and thank you to all of the organizers of the conference. It's been quite a couple of days and another one to go, and I've been enjoying it. Before we get into that habit of, okay, where are the slides and how can I turn my video off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about who I am. So my name is Walker Ladd, and my pronouns are she and they. I'm the chair of the Department of Research at Saybrook University, a hybrid graduate university founded on the principles of humanistic psychology with a mission of social action and social transformation. Our interdisciplinary department, that's the Department of Research, we're different, we're unique. We're situated within 2 colleges, and we serve all students, master's and doctoral students. So both College of Social Science and the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Science. This will all make sense in a second. So I've been at Saybrook for 7 years, and I've been the chair for 3. And prior to that, I, have a master's in clinical psychology, a doctorate in psychology, a master's of fine arts in dance, and a bachelor of fine art in dance from UCLA. So needless to say, I'm a funny woman in academia. In addition to running the Department of Research, I teach qualitative research, including hermeneutic, phenomenology, and IPA, which we'll learn about today, heuristic inquiry, autoethnography, narrative inquiry, and Straussian and constructivist grounded theory. And philosophically, to my colleague who was prior, I'm trained in continental philosophy and specifically the traditions of hermeneutic, phenomenology, and pragmatism. So now that we have all of those words out, what the heck does this have to do with a study that I did? So being funny in academia, the lived experience. In the slides that I'll tick through quite quickly, a little bit of a background, research design, the findings, discussion, and future suggestions. So background, when I started looking at this material, as is the case with many other topics in human sciences, the empirical research that we count on, most of us, reflects a strict positivist assumption regarding the fact that we're all agreeing that there are objective measures, truth and knowledge about things. Positivist. However, the interpretivist paradigm that I seem to like privileges the subjective nature of truth and says, you know what, there are actually multiple intersecting ontologies, all these fancy schmancy words, but I want to break it down this way. So again, I started looking at the theoretical, conceptual, the plethora of research that's out there about, actually, it's mostly about humor. And I learned a lot about the literature of, regarding what is funny. So as this amazing conference has suggested, humor studies systematically analyze this observable expression and reaction to humor or mirth, right? In language, society, history, and culture. In the tradition of the hard sciences, both within health science and social science, the linguistics, discourse analysis, so many wonderful examples at this conference. Health sciences looking at from evolution, and it makes me laugh just thinking about the studies that I read regarding evolutionary theories on men being funny and women's reaction to them, particularly during ovulation. Yes, so the cognitive psychology, neuropsychology, humor is studied, but it's studied from this positivist paradigm. I had one question. That's a question I'm going to ask you at the end of this. What is it like to be funny? Not what is funny? What is humorous? What is it like to be funny? And the way I framed this was through Heidegger's care structure, hermeneutic phenomenology, and this idea of, hang in there with me because I swear it does play out in a moment. The care structure, just think about this. We are thrown into a world that we knew nothing about beforehand. We have no prior knowledge. It was there before us. It'll be there after us, as is my dog, Miss Trixie, who's making an appearance. The other part of this care structure, how I am interested in being funny, is facticity, this concept that we're thrown in, and there are these elements of our society that are there. They're chosen for us, just from the fact that we were born into it. Existentiality, we exist with possibilities that distinguish us from other human beings and other beings. But where we tend to struggle is within fallenness. What we end up caring for things or thinking we care about things, that we surrender that possibility to what Heidegger would call das Man. And that's what leads to inauthenticity. So here's the design. Plethora of positivist research regarding humor, gender, and the workplace. Problem, as I formed it, was that there's a lack of qualitative research on the lived experience, which is phenomenological, of being funny. Lack of qualitative research on lived experience of being funny, much less a funny woman in academia. And the research question, which was really fun to get through IRB, who said, people study this? What is the lived experience of being a funny woman in academia? As with any good research, I started with my own paradigm in order to help me choose the method, interpretivist, and within that, hermeneutic phenomenology, more leaning towards Gadamer for the HP folks in the house, but with a nod to, obviously, Heidegger. I knew the methodology, wanted to get qualitative, and from that, kind of ticking down that slide, I chose interpretative, which I always struggle with, phenomenological analysis, or IPA. IRB approval, and I had 6 women who identified as being women, as being funny, and employed in academia. They participated each in 2 average 60-minute recorded Zoom interviews using what IPA uses, in-depth interviewing, which means about 3 questions and a lot of responses. So the material, we don't say data as much in qualitative inquiry. The material that was generated from these was about 200 pages of raw material. Part of how, and I know that there are hermeneutic scholars, there have to be in this crowd, but think about 200 pages of raw material, moving through it in a circular way to look at the original phenomena. What is it like to be a funny woman in academia? My assumptions and beliefs, my experiences, Gadamer would say my horizons, then circling back down into the participants' textual descriptions, and then what does that reveal about the phenomena, and then we go around again. I'm not going to talk through all of these. I just did want to give a slide to it. So there are 7 steps of analysis in IPA, and the unique nature of IPA, and part of the reason I chose it was that we go 1 participant at a time. So all of the data material that's generated from that, from 1 participant, you'd go through all of these steps down into step 6. looking for things that are called experiential statements and personal experiential statements, etc. So this is very top level on the findings. What did all of that material tell me? Each participant at a time, and then folding back into what's happening across all of these cases. That being a funny woman in academia is a tightrope. Being funny is being in flow. And being funny means being my full self. Tightrope, couple of quotes from the material from a participant. The tightrope of being taken seriously. I always wanted to be taken seriously in that way, scholarly. And I think that there's something about being a funny woman that feels counter to that, even though it shouldn't, and in a way that I don't think other people necessarily experience, like specifically men necessarily experience. Another participant, in any given work situation, there's maybe expectations that I feel coming from society or from maybe the immediate history of work and professional settings, and maybe expectations that have been learned from, I guess, the kind of, I don't know, white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist society that we function in. Being taken seriously, being funny, being a funny woman in academia is the lived experience of a tightrope of trying to be taken seriously as a professor in an academic setting, and as a woman who wishes to be funny. I feel like it's this very bizarre triangulation where I'm feeling myself pulled in multiple directions because I'm both in power and out of power as a professor. That's empowered, but a woman who doesn't often have power. What an incredible gift that material is, this tightrope of wanting to be taken seriously, seen as smart, seen as competent, and yet how can we do that running the risk of not being taken seriously? So what is it like? In addition to the experience of it within the academic context of it being a tightrope, I asked, what is it like? What is it like? It feels like breathing. I feel like I'm flying. You know, like a soaring eagle or something when I make a great joke, because I feel like it connects me with my students. When I'm in a social space and I'm just like killing it, I feel really, such a weird analogy. And this is an image to take with you. But it's like if I'm a box, and usually the amount of me in that box is there, but then being funny in the moment, the authentic moment of being in funny is the space my spirit takes up, is like a circle within it. It's kind of like this. So this is the kind of language and the kind of subjective truth that you can get from doing this kind of research. So in addition to IPA is such a great tool for knowing two things, both what is it like, but also what does it mean? It feels like I'm in flow, like a flow state. I feel like I am like fully myself. Well, it's the best feeling in the world in so many ways, because I mean, I think one of the ways is you just feel so yourself. You just feel like you're so yourself. And you feel like you're connecting with people on a deeper level. Going right back to a very quick review of, so how does this apply to this idea of a care structure? again, it was 200 pages and a lot of data that I won't give at you. But think again, this idea of we're thrown in, and the facticity, the existentiality, and the fallenness, how does it apply?
5 minutes
Walker,
left.
thanks. Well, the facticity of the lived experience of being a funny woman and in academia are agency versus communion. Those are given to us whether we wanted them or not, the gendered expectations of behavior, norms. And those of you who are familiar with agency versus communion, I hope that resonates. What about the existentiality, the care of being funny? It's a lived experience, it's being in flow, and it's being one's full self. And the fallenness that we find ourselves leaning towards, the they of norms, is the pull of academia to do as others. Future suggestions. Please use an interpretive paradigm in the research. Explore qualitative inquiry and research methodologies to get at the nature of things that we're all looking at. And this research for me is a call for the exploration. Do it. The full spectrum of the human experience of being funny so that we can get a better understanding of the meaning of being human. All of those theories in that huge book. Is that right? Humor, mirth, etc. At its core, I want to know, what is it like to be funny? And I really wanted to know, what it's like to be a funny woman. All kinds of really interesting material came from it. And if you have questions specific about the results and participants, I look forward to answering those questions. I'm going to give it on back.
Thank you. We have time. Go for it.
From all the experts here, what is it like to be funny?
Dr. Otardo?
I wouldn't know. It's never happened to me. But I do have actually a couple of questions. So you mentioned agency versus communion.
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain?
Yeah. So within the facticity element, or this, where funny women in academia found themselves, were behaviors that were scripted through an understanding of stereotypical norms of behavior and who gets rewarded and who gets not rewarded. Agency within this construct are behaviors of independence, ideas, creativity, and humor. And all of those are associated with men. And a lot of the research in implicit association, implicit biases align with that. And we haven't even talked about the differences between people of color and those who, the majority of this research is done by white cisgender people. So that's the agency. Communion is the other side of that, where we tend to associate qualities of connection, of nurturing, and of communion with feminine, with women. So to walk that tightrope for participants was knowing, a lot of the participants talked about they use humor as a tool and they're funny with their friends. So within the context of academia, they can use humor, but they have to be very cautious because super quickly it could be perceived as a woman having agency, where society says, you really really shouldn't be talking like that, or you shouldn't have those behaviors that are attributed traditionally with men. So one of the participants really quickly talked about how she uses humor as time management in meetings. She has to be very careful because if she's seen as driving the meeting, it could push back on her evaluation if peers see her as being bossy. That help?
Yes, no, it does, and now I understand exactly. So the other thing that I wanted to mention that's directly related to this, and I may have misunderstood what you said. Okay, let me preface this. When you said about qualitative research, sorry, you put linguistics and discourse analysis in the quantitative side?
In the empirical side, the
Empirical
positivist.
side. Okay.
Positivist.
Okay, because I mean, there is vast amount, in fact, enormous amount of research that defines itself and is qualitative, and done by women, by the way, that comes to the conclusion that humor is exactly communion in the sense that you define. So I don't see that division the way you're drawing it, to be honest.
Well, I figured this comment would come up. Qualitative inquiry in Denzin's tradition is an inquiry that is not based in empirical positivist constructs of data and science and hard science. And many of my qualitative companions, I've been doing qualitative research for 20 years, many fall into this, well, I'll just do a qualitative, I'll just do some thematic analysis, I'll just take a large number. Anytime we're saying that the objective truth of something is based on our observing it and that it exists outside of us, that it is an objective piece of work that we can go look at. I would say as a purist that tends to come from colonial traditions, empirical traditions. And it's interesting that we think about, well, it was written by a woman. Well, then that just makes it all better.
Oh no, that's not what I meant. It was just essentially a coincidence. But the discourse analysis, sorry, the discourse analysis of humor is based on phenomenological background.
So what are the studies about being funny?
Well, I mean, obviously it's language and linguistics, right? So it's discourse. So it's not so much about, the
Lived experience.
well, because I mean, but it's the doing it, right?
Right. But that's the difference.
Okay.
The
Well,
doing versus being it. And I'm not in linguistics, right?
no,
So
I understand, but
I
what
come
I'm
from
saying,
that. Go
what I'm
ahead.
saying is that research is based on a phenomenological epistemology, where the idea is not to look at it from the outside, etc., but is to say, what does it mean to the participant?
But the material is still objectively identified.
Pardon?
The material or the data is still objectively identified and
Well,
not
it's
given.
recordings of conversations.
Correct, very similar to what I did.
Yeah.
But the difference is the interpretivist lens. So do I know every single phenomenological reference that you're making? No, but I do know that discourse analysis has roots in phenomenology,
Yeah.
but leans towards empiricism. And so I think I'm bringing something different to the table
No,
for
I'm
you all
not
to
saying you're
chew
bringing
on.
the same thing. I'm just disagreeing on where you're drawing the lines.
The other piece of discourse analysis to get in the weeds is its relationship to Husserl and its relationship to descriptive. I don't do descriptive. I do hermeneutic phenomenology, and descriptive phenomenology in the tradition of Husserl, who was Heidegger's teacher, looks at the structure of existence as it is more of a positivist, empirical look at phenomena. That's clear. That's clear. So the idea of transcendental phenomenology or descriptive phenomenology looks to get the description of structure of human experience while bracketing the researcher off. Now, here is a core difference. Hermeneutic phenomenology and IPA say, good luck bracketing yourself off. We don't believe that it is possible. The idea that you need to bracket yourself off is inherently science. It's inherently empirical. It's inherently, to get at the real truth, the researcher themselves should try to not be there. So as I'm reading, as I'm looking, as I'm using the words, right? So Heidegger said the language is the house of being. So as we're talking and engaging space, it's not about the structure for me.
Well, I don't want to monopolize the discussion. Amy has a question in the chat.
Yeah, I can read the chat comments. So Amy says, your work raises a lot of questions too about perceptions of power in academia. She also said, did the subjects identify in any specific way what sort of funny? Were they sharp-tongued Dorothy Parker, or were they goofy Goldie Hawn in Laugh-In?
Such a great question. First of all, we call them participants, not subjects. But the participants, I will share that a common thread, it was very small, sample, but they spoke about being seen early in life. All of them had an experience where someone saw them and said out loud in some way, "You're funny." And that "you're funny" was a way for them to own who they were and continue that throughout their lives. And there was a huge juxtaposition for it. It turned out all of these participants were identified as gifted. And they had to hold these two things. And do I show myself as smart, or do I show myself as funny? Smart or funny? Funny or smart? And how they navigated. So one participant in particular talked about a relative. They also talked about how it's DNA, a relative who always took props with him to parties, to family parties, like a nose, and would do things in context that were just like, oh my gosh, there goes Uncle so-and-so. But that juxtaposition and that role is part of how they saw themselves being able to make sense of their being. The last thing I'll share, and this does coincide with my own experience, is that when I asked about what's the first time you experienced yourself as being funny, they were childhood memories that were not necessarily positive. So, for example, having dinner and you're 10 and you have the family gathered, and dad, who is a successful alcoholic, comes to the table and sits down and passes out. And that person starts busting up. That was the experience of being funny. And don't discount this idea of being flow, being in flow. To ask a total stranger, what does it feel like in your body? It feels like flying. It feels like being expansive. These are the kinds of experiences that I hope we start asking each other as scholars.
Thank you so much for your talk and for your time today. We are going to move on to our next speaker.